Forget what you thought you knew about 90s console graphics. Seriously, take everything you remember about jaggy polygons and foggy textures and toss it out the window. Because in 1995, one game walked into the ring, flexed its 3D muscles, and drop-kicked the competition straight back into the 16-bit age. That game was Virtua Fighter 2 on the Sega Saturn. And no, this wasn't just a good port. It was Sega making a statement, a mic drop, and a technical achievement that screamed, yes, the Saturn can do 3D, and it can do it at 60 frames per second. So how did this miracle happen? How did Sega take a beast of an arcade game running on Model 2 hardware and somehow make it sing on the Saturn? Grab a cup of nostalgia and settle in. This is the story of Virtua Fighter 2, the Saturn's graphical crown jewel. Let's rewind to the mid-90s. Arcades were still the gold standard for cutting-edge visuals, and Sega, they were killing it. With their Model 2 hardware, Virtua Fighter 2 Arcade was absolutely dominating in Japan. We're talking comic books, food products, anime, tournaments, you name it. Virtua Fighter 2 wasn't just a game, it was a phenomenon. Meanwhile, the Sega Saturn had just launched, and Sega, ever confident, promised that a home version of Virtua Fighter 2 was coming, and soon. Now keep in mind, this was 1995. The PlayStation was just making waves with games like Battle Arena Toshinden and Tekken, was blowing minds with their arcade-to-console visuals. The Saturn, by comparison, had a rough start. The original Virtua Fighter port was, let's be kind and say, wobbly. So expectations were sky high for Virtua Fighter 2. Could the Saturn actually deliver? Against all odds, yes, and then some. Sega not only delivered an incredibly faithful version of the arcade experience, but they did it in the Saturn's high-resolution mode, locked at 60 frames per second. That kind of performance was practically unheard of in 3D console games at the time. This wasn't just a game, it was Sega's AM2 flexing hard. So, how the heck did they do it? The Sega Saturn was notorious for being difficult to program. Dual CPUs, multiple video processors, a design that felt more like a dare than a development platform. But AM2, led by Yu Suzuki and his elite team of wizards, cracked the code. They leaned heavily into the Saturn's dual CPU architecture. They used VDP2 to fake 3D backgrounds through layered parallax scrolling. They rewrote entire chunks of code just to optimize polygon rendering. And what we got was stunning. The game ran at a resolution of 704x480, that's high-res interlaced video. Fighters moved at a silky 60 frames per second. Animation was tight, responsive, and precise. The character models were simplified a bit from the arcade, sure, but the shading and textures more than made up for it. Compared to the competition, it wasn't even close. Tekken on the PlayStation looked great in motion, but it ran at a much lower resolution. Street Fighter Alpha, still running in 2D. Digitized sprites that looked about as stiff as your dad's old action figures. Meanwhile, Virtua Fighter 2 was putting out near-arcade quality visuals on a console that most developers couldn't figure out. AM2 basically said, let's show you how it's done. But let's be clear, this wasn't an exact one-to-one port. The original arcade game ran on Sega's beefy Model 2 hardware, a powerhouse with capabilities far beyond what the Saturn could offer. The arcade stages had fully polygonal 3D backgrounds, rich lighting, and complex geometry. There's no doubt about it, it was a sight to behold. The Saturn version? That got trimmed down. Backgrounds were faked with 2D planes, and lighting was simplified. But you know what? Most players didn't care. Because what AM2 preserved was the feel and the overall look, where it really mattered. The game moved with the same speed. The fighters responded in the same way. The precision of timing, the smoothness of inputs, all of it was there. And this wasn't just a technical trick, it was design brilliance. AM2 know that getting 60 FPS and high-res character models was more important than having some 3D rocks in the background. Even small details like your character shadows and ring edges were adapted cleverly to preserve the illusion. Unless you were squinting at screenshots side by side, the illusion of an arcade-perfect port was rock solid. So what was the impact? Simply put, Virtua Fighter 2 raised the bar for console 3D graphics. Showed what the Saturn could really do when in the right hands. It turned skeptics into believers. It gave Saturn fans something to brag about when the PlayStation was stealing all of the headlines. And it laid down the groundwork for future Saturn bangers like Fighting Vipers, Last Bronx, Fighters Megamix. These games used the same tech and even improved on it in places, but Virtua Fighter 2 was the one that lit the path. Beyond Sega, other devs like Tecmo took notice. Dead or Alive on the Saturn reused parts of the Virtua Fighter 2 engine. The very idea of prioritizing frame rate and animation over flashy backgrounds became the gold standard for fighting games. And here's the kicker. Even today, retro fans still praise the Saturn version as one of the most technically impressive games of its generation, not because it was perfect, but because it knew exactly where to compromise and where not to. So let's compare a bit more. Tekken was huge on the PlayStation. It had stylish characters and killer FMV. Battle Arena Toshinden looked good in screenshots, but played like molasses. Mortal Kombat, of course, had the gore and the big name recognition. But Virtua Fighter 2, it had elegance, discipline, and focus. It wasn't flashy, but it was fast. It didn't have fireballs or fatalities, but it had timing, strategy, and real martial arts. And that's what set it apart. You weren't just button mashing, you were studying, reacting, learning timing, spacing, and angles. And that sense of authenticity has helped the series endure. Technically, Virtua Fighter 2 on Saturn was a tour de force. Artistically, it was grounded in real-world fighting styles. Fancy some Jeet Kune Do? Jackie Bryant's got your back. Or you could even try something new and different with characters like Shun-Di with his drunken boxing, or using praying mantis-style kung fu as Lion Raphael. And in terms of impact, it made the Saturn look like it belonged in the next generation. So is Virtua Fighter 2 the Sega Saturn's graphics king? Absolutely. Not because it had the most polygons, but it knew how to use them, because it delivered 60 FPS gameplay at high resolution with animation and character details that put others to shame. It was a game made by a team who understood the hardware, who refused to cut corners where it mattered most. So, my final thoughts? If you owned a Saturn in the 90s, chances are this game was in your library. If it wasn't, what were you even doing? It's available on modern Xbox platforms and emulation in all its retro glory. Or best yet, grab the Saturn disc, plug in a CRT, and experience the magic like it was meant to be. Because some games age, and some, like Virtua Fighter 2, remain timeless. If you like this throwback, please hit that like button and share it with a retro gaming buddy. Alright my friends, this is the Retro Gaming Boss signing out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.